As much as I want to assume you already know what Skins is, I can't in good conscience make such an ass out of myself from jump, so Skins was a fairly successful British teen drama that ran for 6 seasons, from 2007 to 2013. It followed the lives of a rotating group of adolescents as they dealt with the trials and tribulations of everyday life, their relationships with their peers, their relationships with the adults in their lives who were always more concerned with being their friend than being of guidance, and their experiments with drugs, sex, and alcohol. It was the launchpad for the careers of actors like Hannah Murray, Joseph Dempsey, Dev Patel, Kaya Scodelario, and I would say Nicholas Hoult, but I think About a Boy took care of that for him.
Shake your ass!
Skins was mad love too. It had fans from all over the globe. Big ones in the UK, big ones in the US, big ones all around, and the love was deserved. It had a lot of comedy, a lot of conflict, but also a lot of heart. It wasn't a one-trick pony with soapy issues that were resolved by the next episode. In fact, many of the issues characters dealt with remained unresolved by the show's end, which maintained a very raw and gritty realism. A character in the first season, Cassie Ainsworth, struggled with depression and a crippling eating disorder. At the end of her self-titled episode, she bites into a burger, but her ED wasn't cured. Her depression wasn't cured. By the next episode, she's struggling with the same things and tells her love interest, Sid,
"Oh, wow. I didn't eat for 3 days so I could be lovely."
In another episode in the first season, Chris Miles, a fun character who up until this point had represented the collective group's party animal spirit, was dealing with the sudden abandonment of his mother, who up and left him with $1,000 and a note. Thinking she's going to return by the end of the week, Chris blows the money on a big party, and he doesn't realize until he enters his mother's room and sees the empty drawers and the empty wardrobe that she's left him for good. Chris's mother doesn't come back by the end of the episode. In fact, he doesn't see her again until the second season. And things get worse. He ends up losing his house to a squatter. He goes to his estranged fathers for help, but is turned away and is forced to live in an on-campus dorm. Though the show gained a reputation for the crazy parties, crazy drug use, and crazy sex it depicted, none of it was ever glorified, and under the surface of these wild parties were kids struggling to deal with the hand they'd been dealt. This honest and sympathetic depiction of teenage life was admired, and Skins became a much beloved show. So, as with most international films and TV shows that are successful and respected globally, American networks just could not wait to get their hands on a piece of the glory. Skins was created by father-son duo Jamie Britton and Brian Elsley. Since they got the show off the ground and it started making waves in the UK, American networks were reaching out to them from all sides for the right to make an American version. At this point in time, there were many British to American TV shows that had floated around. Most of them were flops, but 2 of them were pretty successful. And out of those 2, one was still on the air and had garnered widespread acclaim. One of them was Three's Company, which by that point had been off the air for decades, and the other was The Office. The US remake took elements of the UK version and improved upon them tremendously. The US version even lasted longer than the UK version and got more involved with different characters around Dunder Mifflin. Plus, it gave us moments like this.
Ugh.
Okay, you know what? You don't need to make that sound.
I'm sorry, you were just a lot bonier than I thought you were gonna be.
There are plenty of people who love touching me.
The same year that the Skins remake would eventually air, another British to American TV show would premiere and rock everyone's world. Shameless was originally created by Paul Abbott, and it followed the lives of the Gallagher family on a Manchester estate. It was produced by the same company that made Skins. The US remake saw subtle changes that improved on the story and its central characters. The Manchester estate was changed to Southside Chicago, and where the UK version kind of wandered alongside various different characters in the same vein of Skins, the US version stayed with the same characters and the same family throughout every season, which is going to make not seeing Fiona in future episodes even more difficult, but I'm fine. Even though the premiere and eventual success of Shameless was still a ways away, it and the other aforementioned shows stood as prime examples for why Skins remake had so much potential. Elsley was approached by many different networks who all offered different things, but in the end, he went with the one that raised the most eyebrows: MTV. Now, if this was the 90s or the early 2000s, I would probably think, yeah, why not? MTV was a lot more risque back then with shows like Beavis and Butthead, Jackass, and its many spin-offs. But by the time the remake was officially in production, it was 2010. It was the age of Teen Mom and My Super Sweet 16. It wasn't cookie-cutter clean, but it was far off from the days of giant schlong jokes and celebrity deathmatch.
He's hit the ground more times than baby Fetterline's head.
When asked why he didn't consider a network like HBO or Showtime, the latter of which eventually became home to Shameless, Elsie stated, "But pay cable channels are paid for by middle-aged people. And by middle-aged, I mean people over the age of 25. Kids don't control those setups. MTV is ideally placed to access the markets that we're interested in, which is young people." Even though MTV was a questionable choice, you could definitely see what he was getting at. Skins was a show created for and partially created by teens. During the UK production, the writing staff frequently had teenage consultants who would come in, read the script, and write off what was unrealistic. Plus, paid programming like Showtime and HBO weren't in every household, and as a result, not as easily accessible to teenagers as good old MTV would be. And what would be the point of making a show for teenagers if teenagers couldn't actually watch it? In many ways, MTV was the right choice, but in more ways, as we'll soon find out, it was the wrong one. Once the deal was finalized, Elsie was brought on board as a head writer of the US show. That's right, the same person who wrote scenes like this.
No, that never happened. That never happened. You never happened.
It did.
What's happening to me? Happened, it never happened. Happened, it never happened. Never happened, it never happened.
Oh.
Hit me again.
No.
What's wrong with me? Hit me again. I'm not scared. I'm not scared of anything. Hit me.
Also, wrote scenes like this.
And only the hottest, by the way.
Listen, I know you like to pluck the lady heart. That's boring. You're mysterious.
What?
But hold back. Nobody gets in. It's mysterious.
I mean, get you a man who can do both, I guess. The show started to come together very quickly. An open casting call was set up in New York where 6 out of the 9 main actors were cast. Most of them were unknowns with little to no acting experience. This was reminiscent of a decision with the original cast where many of the actors were chosen without having prior experience. Actors like Larissa Hope, Hannah Murray, Dev Patel, and Mitch Ewer, just to name a few, were complete newbies. Soon enough, the MTV production had an official cast. James Newman joined on as Tony, Rachel Tay Bernard as Michelle, Brittany Oldford as Katie, Ron Mustafa as Abood, Daniel Flaherty as Sid, Sophia Black-Delia as Taya, Eleanor Zeke as Yura, Camille Mills as Daisy, and Jesse Carreri as Chris. There was a lot of wariness in the air about the remake. People weren't sure it would work. They were scared MTV would ruin the pure grit of the original show, and MTV used those criticisms thrown at them as part of their wildly expensive marketing. MTV spent so much money on marketing alone. Like, so much. Aside from the gritty glam post-party haze photo shoots, there were elements like the reverse trailer that dropped and shifted many expectations. Fans of the original, including myself, were still on the fence about the remake and what it would entail, but this trailer, this gorgeous, hard-hitting, and brilliant trailer, was perfect. Yes, there was an aspect of this MTV production that was perfect. For fans of the original, it got their hopes up that maybe the remake wouldn't buff all the rough edges away, and for people who hadn't heard of the UK show, this trailer was so brash and in your face that it was hard not to look. The cinematography was cool, the depiction of the party didn't feel too tame or too edgy, and the music was great. I'm a glutton for sleigh bells. What can I say? The anticipation had been building. The website set up for the remake had hit about 5 million video streams by December 2010 and 11,000 Facebook likes. It may not seem like a lot now, but for a show that starred unknown actors, no Zendaya here to boost intrigue, it was kind of a big deal. At last, the show premiered on January 17, 2011 to 3.2 million viewers. And it was kind of a mess. I think we can all agree that shot-for-shot remakes are vastly more annoying than remakes that make questionable changes. I don't know about you, but hearing Vince Vaughn deliver the exact same lines Anthony Perkins delivered in the exact same frame is way more grating to the senses than the changes in that stupid family incest plotline and reinterpretation of Oldboy. Because at least I can laugh at Oldboy. There's nothing to laugh at about seeing a good movie remade in the exact shot-for-shot same way, but just in exceedingly lower quality.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes. Oh no!
For the most part, the writers on board for Skins were aware of this, and changes were made, some big, some small. And the pilot episode, an episode that generally stays the same in remakes because, well, how else are you supposed to establish the world and the characters you're trying to adapt? There were small changes that would later grow bigger and more noticeable as the season went on. Minor changes included changing character names, Anwar to Abood, Cassie to Katie, Sydney to Stanley, Zhao to Daisy, Effie to Yura. But there was a big one that threw a lot of people off, especially fans of the original. A minor but majorly beloved character in the UK version just ceased to exist stateside. Maxie, the gay dancer of the original series, was written out of the remake, and Taya, a lesbian cheerleader, was written in. As irking as it is that the writers seem to have had the thought process of, well, there can't be two gays in the show now, can there? What's more irking is how they go about building Taya's character and the conflict she faces as her arc develops. Spoiler alert, it's not good, but we'll pin it for later. Other than that, most of the changes in characters are inoffensive, but also kind of unnecessary. I get that they wanted to distance the US show from the UK show, but honest to God, the names weren't really a problem. But perhaps the worst offender of the name change is with the eccentric drug dealer character Stanley meets. In the original show, this eccentric drug dealer goes by the name
Matt Twatter.
And it's funny. I won't go the long mile and say that it's especially clever, but it's funny and it actually does a great job of preparing us for what the character's like before we meet him. In many ways, Matt Twatter is a lot like Mad Hatter. A bit odd, a bit off, easily affronted, and flips a switch at the drop of a hat. At first glance, Mad isn't someone who looks like a person we should fear or be wary of. He's kind of funny looking actually, with his circus mustache and hippie clothes. But then he turns around and he does shit like this.
How about an ounce of spliff?
3 ounces it is.
No, an ounce of spliff.
3 ounces. That's £300 of easy credit. So you've got 48 hours to pay me.
What's it changed to in the US version, you ask?
His name's Mad Maladong.
That's it. I can't think of anything to say really, it's just not as good. But Mad's name change isn't really that big of a deal. It's a tiny detail, but it really tips you off on what's in store. Aside from character names, there were small things. Zhao, for instance, was a classical clarinetist. Daisy is a jazz-loving trumpeter. When Effie got back home, she looked like she'd just gotten back from a party that ran too late. When Yura gets back, she kind of looks like she's been living under a bridge. The gang smokes in the bathroom stall instead of smoking right out front on the green. Most of these changes are, again, inoffensive and fine. While there are changes here and others sprinkled throughout the season that I like, there's one change in this first episode that bothered me. The original cast all reside in a Bristol neighborhood, specifically in a working-class neighborhood. Most of the characters, with the exception of Zhao, whose father was a successful recording artist, don't have the means of living a particularly lavish lifestyle. In Chris's episode, when his mom leaves him £1,000, many of them come over to Chris's house just to see the money. This is before the party is even an idea. Anwar freaks out at the sight of it.
Is it true? I'm money, babe. I'm money, yes! That's fucking great, Anwar.
They are, as Chris so lovingly referred to Tony as, town scum. This is different from Abigail, a minor character who recurs sporadically throughout Series 1 and twice in Season 2. Abigail goes to a private girls' school, worries about rugs imported from Iran, and has a confusing posh accent. Seriously, her accent many a time just bewilders the fuck out of the main cast.
My friends think you're really cool, yeah?
You're sorry?
My friends? These must be your friends. Sorry? Oh, yeah, that would be so safe, you know.
Great, because we've got some really cool shit which will get you...
But we can't smoke anything in the house.
The house?
In the US version, Abigail's parallel Tabitha uses slang that is partly outdated and partly non-existent. This change just doesn't work as well as the joke of Abigail's posh accent being incomprehensible. But the joke, as it was in the original, is a very minor detail and mostly unimportant. It has no impact on the plot or on Tabitha's character. They could be trying to say that Tabitha is the type of person who tries too hard to be cool, but that was already decently established prior to her use of slang. My point is, why include it at all if it's not going to make sense anymore? In the end, though, it wasn't the changes made to the show that hurt it. One of my favorite changes in the first episode is what they did with Katie's character, who was meant to be a parallel to Cassie. In this episode, Stan meets Katie before the party, down in life skills at school. Katie's surrounded by food sculptures and is absolutely nothing like Cassie. Where Cassie was whimsical and almost fairy-like, which later brought on debates on whether or not her character romanticized mental illness, Katie was completely different. She was macabre, had a dark sense of humor, and
got a lot of knives.
Yeah, they cool? Do you love to see stuff hanging?
While a lot of fans of the original hated these changes and hated Katie for it, I applauded it and actually thought it was a good idea. There should have been more of these character changes in the show. So no, the changes weren't really a problem, not by themselves. It was the things they chose to keep the same. So the show's not great. It's privy to bits of already awkwardly written dialogue being more awkwardly delivered.
Want some pancakes, Jimmy?
I want to take a dump in my own house! I'm gonna park my Chevy in Michelle's garage.
I was here auditioning for the chamber choir. I heard they needed male parts in the bass section. And you know what? They do. They really do.
Okay, so there's a writing problem. There's some acting problems. And narratively, it's a bit all over the place. But it's not worse than your run-of-the-mill teen drama. It's like Degrassi. Guys, as much as some of us love Degrassi and as important as those characters are to our lives, let's pour one out for JT. We can't lie to ourselves and pretend it wasn't a flawed show. Half the time those characters weren't lived in, and I can't count on one hand how many instances of dialogue just sounded so bad and so forced. His take on skins is basically Degrassi with, well, more skin. So what does it matter? It's not just moments of bad dialogue or poor delivery. Not at all. I won't sit here and pretend that bad writing is what killed this remake. Not when one of the most popular shows made for teens today is known for how bad the writing is.
Conveniently for me, there are actually videos on YouTube entirely dedicated to Riverdale having bad writing, and what's quite funny is if you search Riverdale bad writing into the YouTube search bar, Riverdale just comes up.
No, where the show starts to really unravel is when relics from Bristol end up in Toronto cosplaying as Baltimore. That is, plot lines from the UK show making their way to the US version where the events leading up to those plot points no longer exist. For instance, in the Trip to Russia episode, Tony really gets it into his head that he wants to go down on Maxie. His reasoning is that he's never done it before, and there's not much else to do in Russia, so might as well go down on Maxie, right?
We're in Russia. I want to try something new.
I'm not a hobby, Tony. You're not taking up canoeing here.
No, I've been canoeing.
Maxie isn't interested, at least not at first, but the trip to Russia brings up something terrible that threatens to ruin Anwar and Maxie's friendship. Anwar is ashamed that Maxie is gay. Of course, this pisses Maxie off. He's seen Anwar smoke weed, flirt with girls, watch porn, get roaringly drunk. All of these things are wrong for any Muslim boy, and yet the only thing Anwar seems to have a problem with is Maxie's sexuality. He's being a right hypocrite.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
This rift that grows between Maxie and Anwar pushes Maxie to Tony for comfort in the end. They don't get far because Maxie's unimpressed by Tony's oral abilities, so that's it, except it's not. Michelle had been drunkenly passed out and in the room with him the entire time. She woke up in the middle of it. This leads to her confronting Tony, then Maxie, and even Zhao, who has a sweet soul who deserved so much better from the show, I swear to God. Lastly, Michelle confronts Abigail. Her confrontation with Abigail sees her coming out on top, unlike the last time, and she meets Josh, Abigail's brother. Officially broken up with Tony, Michelle starts dating Josh, and Tony is pretty much abandoned by the friend group. As everyone knows, Tony is kind of a scumbag and always has been. They forgive Maxie and stay on Michelle's side during the breakup. But do you think Tony Stoneham just accepts that? Of course not.
Instead, she ends up with this Josh guy, complete fucking knob, who I have to sort. So that's your fault too, you know that?
Saw her? What did you do?
Put naked pictures of Abigail on his phone. Made sure Michelle could see him. Made sure everyone could see him. It's quite funny. funny. That's sick.
The plan, as ridiculous as it is, works. Michelle has a breakdown and then a breakup. And she ends it with Josh. Tony tries to reunite with Michelle, but she doesn't want him either. Michelle's just sick of creepy guys, really. Can you blame her? In this episode, we see a side of Tony we've never seen before. He's lonely, isolated, and helpless. We also see a side of Effie we've never seen before. Up to this point, we knew about Effie's double life, but we've never actually seen it with our own eyes. But her night takes a turn for the worse when she goes to a party and is drugged by Josh. Tony receives menacing messages regarding Effie's whereabouts.
This is Effie's phone. She's currently cruising at 35,000 feet, and there's definitely turbulence ahead.
He reaches out to Sid for his help. When he finally does find Effie with Josh, this happens.
My sister's overdosed, I think. Where are we? Where the fuck? Wait, where are we?
Pass it, I'll give him directions.
What the fuck are you doing?
Okay, let's make a deal. We'll call an ambulance as soon as you fuck your sister.
Yeah. It's twisted, and it's sick, and it's old boy all over again. But when you suspend your disbelief a little bit, it's kind of easy to take in. After all, Michelle's first date with Josh, he tells her that he's given a lot of drugs. His mom is a psychiatrist and sees to it that he regularly goes to therapy and has an endless supply of medication. He also tells her that without his medication, he can be unhinged. He works at the same rehabilitation center that Cassie goes to when she's at her worst. So it's plausible that he would know where to get these drugs, and it's plausible that he would concoct a plan so twisted. In the end, Josh obviously doesn't make Tony have sex with Effie, but he got back at Tony, and that's what he wanted. Tony leaves with Effie and is absolutely devastated that everything that happened to her that night was because of him. Tony starts to change for the best after this. Of course, it's short-lived because brakes don't exist on buses. Now you're probably curious, what does this look like in Canada? Does the plot point still exist? It does. That's the fucking problem. In the Yura episode, we see a side of Tony that's very confusing. He's in a slump because Taya doesn't want him. Yeah, I said Taya. And he won't leave his bed. Wait, let me catch you up to speed. At this point, Tony has had sex with Taya twice. Yeah, I said Taya. These two rendezvous occurred while he was still with Michelle. The first time happens in Taya's episode, which begins with her meeting Betty and middles with her taking Tony to Northern Soul, the same lesbian nightclub she met Betty in. A few questions. This is not her club. She doesn't own this place. Why can she get into this place? Does she have a key? If it was unlocked and open, why is no one else there? I'm so confused, and this is never explained. The second time they have sex is during the trip to Canada, where Abood finds them. By the end of the trip, Michelle is curious about why Tony's acting so different, so uninterested, and she suspects something is up. She later finds out Tony's been cheating when she contracts chlamydia. She's given her medication, punches Tony in the cafeteria, and it isn't until later when she confronts him again in a classroom for calling her nips that she finds out who the other woman is. You'd think that Tony would be saddened by being found out or being humiliated by Michelle giving up on him completely. After all, they've been together practically since they were kids. But no, he doesn't give a shit about Michelle. He's in this slump because he loves Taya. Duh. Anyway, now we're back in the Yura episode. Yura thinks the reason Tony is so down is because of the breakup with Michelle. On her mission to fix things, she finds a note Tony had written but threw away. She reads it and, thinking it was meant for Michelle, meets up with Michelle to show her, but surprise, surprise, it is actually written for Taya. OMG. So Yura's embarrassed and upset. She goes home, Tony turns her away, and she leaves the house like she does almost every night. The next morning, Tony wakes up to discover text messages on his phone. Someone has a sister, and they have horrible spelling. So he heads out to find Stan for his help, and Stan recruits everyone in the friend group to assist in their search for Yura. So, a few more questions. In this version, Tony gets messages the next morning, meaning Yura has been missing for, let's say, 10 or so hours. It's daylight when he gets up and starts his search. You're telling me their parents are so horrible that they don't realize the daughter they take to therapy every other day, the daughter whose silence they're so concerned about, have not noticed that she isn't home. What? What made the situation partly plausible in the original episode was that it all took place over the course of one night, over the course of just a few hours. Effie had already said goodnight to her parents, and they even went into her room afterwards to check on her, fooled only by Tony under her covers. Tony can't risk his parents finding out about Effie's social life, so he handles it on his own, thinking he can manage since it's only been maybe an hour since he last saw her. But you're telling me Tony Snyder wakes up to these messages, knowing his sister went out last night, and thinks, oh, I can handle this on my own, this isn't serious at all. Moving on. They know exactly where to find Yura because Chris recognizes a symbol. I don't know. And they go to a club where terrible music is playing and a fight randomly breaks out. Tony sees Yura projected on the screen and he starts crying, but then he just gives up looking for her. That's the end for him. Stan seems to be the only one with a brain that works because he's the only one who thinks maybe I should go backstage because there's more club back there. And guess what? Yura's fine. With no Josh, with no Maxie, you have to wonder, why did any of this happen? Please welcome Yura to the floor.
What are you doing to me?
Is he here?
What are you talking about? Yes, he's here, Yura. We are all here.
What's he doing?
He's going crazy.
Good. Got her to bed then.
How could you do that to him?
That's right. No Josh, no Maxie, no revenge plot against Tony. Yura kidnaps herself. For what? I've thought about this a lot, and I still can't quite make heads or tails of it, to be honest. We start this episode off with Yura wanting to help her brother out of his slump. And from what she says here, it would seem like this entire plan was hatched just to get him out of bed. But the problem is that it doesn't make a lot of sense. She clearly cares about her brother and his well-being, and I doubt she'd want to hurt him, so what's the convoluted plan for? Why hurt him more? And without the Josh storyline, without Tony learning his lesson as a result of this, it does nothing for his character either. What is this plot point supposed to do?
You never understand anything, Stan, do you?
No, I don't.
You stupid dildo. He looks up to you. It's you he loves.
Okay, so if she didn't do it to get him out of bed, she did it to show Stanley that Tony loves him. But why though? I thought the problem was Michelle or Taya. What's Stanley got to do with it? There's no clear explanation on her reasoning for this plan, and it's probably the most frustrating thing about this entire show. You didn't need this plot point, and you've proven that you don't mind making big changes. Let it go. The worst aspect of it is how they took the character development and revelations at the episode and just made it as surface level as possible. Convinced he doesn't need anyone, Tony is surprised by how much his sudden isolation affects him. Instead of showing that, let's over-explain it. Despite fucking around with Sid like he doesn't care about him, Tony reaches out to Sid first in his time of need. Sid really is his best friend, and Tony really does need him despite insisting that he doesn't need anyone. Instead of showing that, let's just have Yura explain it.
He came round, right? He asked you to help find me.
So?
It's maddening, really. But you see what I mean. The changes made to the show aren't bad at all. It's only when those changes interfere with what the showrunners chose to keep. The thing is, this Yura episode could have easily worked out just fine in a different way, without the kidnapped sister plot. This version of Yura, while we never fully get this sense, is supposed to look up to Tony. I can imagine that a girl who looks up to her brother and who realizes that he isn't a great person would be angry. This could have even been the moment where Yura spoke for the first time. What if, after all these years of silence, and after all of these years of only depending on her brother, her first words to him were, "I hate you"? It would have been interesting and, dare I say, a bit touching. But this is something that would only work if their dynamic was properly established and set up in a way that would make this a touching moment. And setups like these are missing from this story. Not just for Yura and Tony, but for Katie and Stanley, Abood and Chris, and perhaps the worst offender, Tony and Taya. Oh my god, Tony and Taya. Everyone's in love with Taya. Abood's in love with Taya, Tony's in love with Taya, fucking Betty's in love with Taya, maybe even half of the cheerleading squad we never hear from again is in love with Taya. And Taya's a cool girl. She likes to draw, she likes to dance, she has a poster of Audrey Hepburn on her wall. She's so cool. It's not a problem that people are attracted to Taya, or even that some of them think that they love her. It's only a problem that it feels so forced. Have you ever seen a rom-com where the two leads have no chemistry at all? It's painful. Taya's love square is painful. The show really wants us to believe that Betty is head over heels for Taya after one night of sex. It really wants us to believe that Tony and Taya have an undeniable connection. It really wants us to believe that Abood cares about Taya as more than A, a friend, and B, a subject for his wet dreams. Abood feeling more for Taya beyond wanting to see a girl, any girl, naked, is never developed. It doesn't even begin to develop.
I like tits. Boobs, breasts, tatas, sweater puppies, gazongas, yaboos, cantaloupes, humper bumpers, jiggle muffins, snack packs, mouth melters, love lumps.
One episode, he teases Taya about how real lesbians are supposed to make out in front of him, and is almost spraying his shorts after Taya loses a bet and shows her breasts to the group. But there's nothing more than a sexual attraction. Tony's the one who convinces Katie to say that she and Stan had been sleeping together since the party, because Taya said this in the pilot episode.
Tony, if you can get that kid's cherry popped, I will accidentally lose control of my breast during next week's halftime show.
This doesn't tell me he wants Taya beyond sex. Every encounter they have after that is all sex. He's not in love with her, but the show really wants you to think that he is. Taya is the dream a straight guy has of a lesbian. The kind of lesbian who they can watch as she gets done with girls, but also the one who, if they whip their dick out in front of her, she'd be totes down. That's what makes Taya's character one of the most upsetting, because she had the most potential to be good, and they ruined that. Of course, we never got to see how her arc concluded. Maybe she would have discovered that she was actually bisexual in the end, and that could have worked too, but guess what? It still would have sucked because the trope that bisexual people are cheaters is just so tired. Anyway, Betty. Oh my god, girl, what are you doing? The morning after Betty and Taya sleep together, Daisy comes to walk with Taya to school as she always does, and Betty responds to seeing her with what sounds like jealousy to me.
Why is she here?
Taya goes in for a kiss, and Betty shakes her head and says,
Don't. Christ's sakes.
Taya calls out,
Scaredy cat.
Now, in the exact same episode, Betty has a sudden, and I mean whiplash sudden, change of heart and approaches Taya at school. Betty hasn't even said anything yet, but Taya's already assuming Betty wants something more, so she says,
We had sex, but I'm not really looking for anything else. Why not?
Okay, all fine and good. But wasn't she the one who tried to give Betty a kiss earlier? Wouldn't that kiss have been outside of the sex they had the night before? Wouldn't it have been an intimate and unnecessary gesture of affection coming from someone who isn't interested in a relationship? And why is Betty suddenly interested in a relationship anyway? What happened between this morning and going to school? I guess she's discovered the power of the pussy. So these relationships end up being laughable. But what about the other ones? What's wrong with Katie and Stanley? What isn't wrong with Katie and Stanley? The relationship between Sid and Cassie moves fast, but at the same time, it moves awfully slow. They meet at the party.
No, but I like that you're funny looking. That's cute. Like, wow, man.
Cassie becomes infatuated with Sid, which grows into a full-on affection that isn't reciprocated at all. It isn't until the season's end that Sid realizes that he feels the same about Cassie. And then, it isn't until the middle of season 2 that they're properly together. Even so, it's clear from the start that Sid cares for Cassie, at least in some abstract way, but it eventually grows stronger. And Cassie cares for Sid in a way that even she struggles to make sense of. They have little moments at first that show how they care for each other, and those moments build and eventually culminate to a very real and romantic, albeit toxic, relationship. Katie and Stanley, on the other hand, they meet at Life Skills. Stan mostly ignores Katie at the party until the kitchen and trampoline scene. He ignores her again on what's supposed to be their date at Michelle's pool party, but he only asked her to go there for drugs anyway. And okay, in the very same episode, he gets off in Michelle's bedroom. Later, when Michelle's mom's slimy boyfriend propositions Katie for sex and Stan sees them from the pool, he bursts into the bedroom and stops it. I won't lie, I actually kind of like this, as Stan realizing and showing he cares about Katie. But I hate this.
You just lose it. Can anyone respect that?
Leave me alone.
You always just lose it.
You don't know.
And I care when you lose it.
You don't know anything.
I care.
You already showed it. You didn't have to tell me. I could figure it out. I'm not gonna lie, that shit was confusing, because up until this point, Stan's interactions with Katie were still far and few between. For him to say that she always does anything, where did that come from? What about the BFFs Abood and Chris? In the original show, Anwar and Maxie were the best friends of the group. Obviously, stateside, there is no Maxie. And you'd think they'd just go straight for the parallel and make Abood's best friend Taya, but they go for Chris, which is a fine and welcome change. Chris, who still ends up homeless in the American take, at one point sleeps in Abood's family treehouse for a bit, and I kind of like this change. But see, during the trip to Russia episode, the gang arrives and Anwar is immediately taken to the back room for an interrogation and strip search. When this happens, most of the group is concerned and shocked, not knowing what to do. No one is more concerned than Maxie, who's clearly upset that his best friend was profiled in such a way. Fortunately, their teacher interjects and bribes the guard so they let Anwar go. No interrogation, no strip searches, no humiliation, or trauma. Here's what happens in Canada. Abood goes into this country fully expecting to be profiled. That by itself is already an interesting change too. Whereas Anwar was kind of blissfully unaware of how the world could view him, Abood seems all too aware of it. He's nervous and jumpy, so when he's allowed to pass into the country without anyone bringing up his name or race, he's genuinely surprised. It's a nice moment. Then Chris, Abood's best friend, says this to the woman working customs.
I guess he didn't tell you about the bomb up his ass.
That really happens. Abood's best friend, as a best friend, might just, be slightly aware of how daunting it is for Abood to go to an airport and go through customs on any occasion, says this, and Abood is immediately detained, interrogated, humiliated, and anally searched. They played his fear of being profiled so seriously, and yet when he's out of the interrogation room hours after being held, his entire experience is played as a joke. I don't know what's worse, it being played for laughs, or how the show still wants us to believe that Abood and Chris are friends after this. I don't know about you, but what best friend could do that? Jesus Christ. I don't want anyone to think that there was nothing good about the show, because trust me, it had its moments. The characterization of Katie, Rachel Tavenard's acting, I like the arc that Michelle has in this. As much as I love the original show, I always thought characters like Michelle were deserving of more development. Michelle was an interesting character in the original and she deserved a bit more love. It was nice to see the nuances for her character in the remake. I like the changes made to Giles' parallel Daisy. Instead of her father being a wealthy recording artist, Daisy has a blue-collar dad who used to be a musician but can't stand music now and sometimes struggles to make the rent. This change makes for the pressure Daisy deals with to be the most responsible person in the room even more sad. I like how season 1 ended with Michelle and Sid already getting started on having a relationship. I like that there was potential for the direction the second season would take. And as much as I'm criticizing the show for all of its bad points, I also have to say that it kind of sucks we didn't get to see what else was in store. There was a strong chance that it would have been more awkward with more odd edits and more wooden dialogue, but there was a chance that it could have been better, too. But we'll never know. In comparison to the original show, the remake was very tame. It didn't have nearly as much profanity, nearly as much tits-out nudity, or nearly as many graphic sex scenes. Even the insults felt tamer. But then again, the king insult dealer in the original, the incomparable Peter Capaldi, is hard to go up against.
Such a shitting idiot!
And yet, the thing that partially ended up killing the show was too many people thought it wasn't tame enough. The teasers were racy, there were photo shoots of the main cast taken for Elle magazine that saw them wearing lingerie, but it wasn't just about the content, it was the fact that so many of the cast members involved in these scenes were still minors at the time. The only ones who were old enough to shoot some of these scenes were James Newman, Sophia Blackdelia, who was 20 at the time of shooting, and Ron Mustafa. The others were all 17 and under. Parent groups were upset about the raciness of the show, but there were more people upset that the scenes in the show involved minors, and had many claiming that it was borderline CP. As a result of the complaints and concerns, sponsors were dropping out of the show left and right. H&R, Taco Bell, you name it, they were gone. Still, MTV tried to keep the show afloat. After all, the network wasn't a stranger to controversy. Teen Mom, Jersey Shore, Jackass, the holy grail of it all, were constantly the subject of controversy. What was the difference? Well, people were watching Jersey Shore. They were watching Teen Mom. And in its prime, you couldn't stop people from watching Jackass. Warnings and lawsuits be damned. After the success of the premiere episode, ratings for Skins just kept getting lower and lower and lower. The premiere had 3.2 million, the second 1.58, then 1.1, then 0.96. By the finale episode, it went back up to 1.1 million, but it was too late. Remember, MTV had cashed out for the show, and without advertisers backing it, they weren't earning anything in return. In the end, it just wasn't financially worth it to keep Skins in the air. Critically, the show wasn't doing much better either. And in June 2011, only 5 months after the premiere, MTV announced that the show would not be renewed for a second season. Things have obviously changed a lot since 2011. So, could a Skins remake work in today's television climate? I mean, we do have Euphoria coming up on us pretty soon. It's another remake, this time of an Israeli teen drama that doesn't have any of the trappings had by Skins nearly a decade ago. The biggest change? Euphoria is broadcasting on HBO, a pay cable network. How about them apples? It's too soon to say how Euphoria will do. I mean, I usually like to watch a thing before I form an opinion about it, but I'm sure it won't make the same mistakes MTV made with Skins back then. We'll see. Before I go, I just want to say the remake wasn't good, but that doesn't mean the cast deserved any of the vitriol they got for it. They were actors. They were kids, playing a role. And even if they were adults, there's never a reason to take the disdain you may have for a show or for a fictional character out on a real person. Anyway, that's the story of MTV Skins. If you got this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.